Daughter hires caregiver for elderly father with Alzheimer's, but never imagined how she'd treat him. No one suspected the family dog was watching everything, and what he does leaves everyone shocked. Before we dive in, if you, like us, are a big animal lover, subscribe to the channel now, so you don't miss any heartwarming stories. Thanks. Now, back to our story. Sarah observed her reflection in the bathroom mirror as she adjusted her navy blazer. Her hazel eyes revealed the accumulated fatigue of the past few months, but there was an unwavering determination in them. From outside the bathroom, she heard the familiar sound of Max, her loyal golden retriever, lightly scratching at the door, accompanied by her dad's confused voice. Taking a deep breath, Sarah opened the bathroom door. Max, with his signature floppy ears and expressive eyes, wagged his tail at the sight of her. David stood in the middle of the hallway, still in his pajamas, his graying hair disheveled and a lost look in his eyes that broke her heart. David frowned, trying to process the information. His blue eyes, once so lively and full of stories to tell, now seemed cloudy, as if constantly searching for something on the horizon of his fragmented memories. David's face lit up for a moment at the mention of coffee, even though Sarah suspected he didn't truly remember the event. Max followed them faithfully, his nails making a soft tap-tap on the hardwood floor. In the kitchen, the table was set for breakfast. Sarah had woken up early to prepare everything: toast, strawberry jam, her dad's favorite, fresh coffee, and the medications organized in their correct time slots. Nancy would arrive in less than an hour, and Sarah needed to ensure everything was perfect before she left. As she helped her dad sit down, Sarah couldn't help but notice how much weight he had lost in recent months. Alzheimer's was progressing faster than she wanted to admit, and the demands of her job as a project manager were increasing at the same rate. The trips, once occasional, were now almost weekly. "Max," Sarah called, and the golden retriever immediately positioned himself next to David's chair, as if understanding his unofficial guardian responsibility. It was amazing how the dog, since he was a puppy, had developed a special bond with David, becoming more than just a pet. "That must be Nancy," Sarah said, trying to keep a casual tone as she walked to the door. Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering. There was something in Nancy's tone that she couldn't quite decipher, but she pushed the feeling aside. After all, she had checked all of the caregiver's references, and they were impeccable. A sharp bark from Max interrupted her sentence. The golden retriever, normally so sociable, was standing at the entrance to the kitchen, with his ears raised and his body tense, emitting a low, guttural sound that Sarah had never heard before. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's trips became an established routine. With each return, she found the house in apparent order, the furniture clean, the clothes washed and ironed, the medications organized in the weekly pill organizers. Still, something bothered her, a persistent feeling she couldn't name. That Thursday afternoon, returning from a particularly exhausting trip to Chicago, Sarah noticed some subtle changes. The garden, which her dad loved to tend before the illness worsened, had plants that were slightly wilted, despite Nancy assuring her that she watered them daily. The photographs on the bookshelf, which David used to stare at for hours trying to recognize familiar faces, were covered in a thin layer of dust. "Dad! Max, I'm home!" Sarah called, leaving her suitcase in the entryway. "Sarah, so glad you're back," Nancy's voice sounded from the kitchen. "Your dad is napping in his room. You know how he gets sleepy after lunch." In the bathroom, Max stopped in front of the laundry hamper. Sarah hesitated for a moment before lifting the lid. At the bottom of the hamper, she found several of her dad's adult diapers, some visibly used longer than they should have been. "Yes, just checking on a few things," Sarah replied, closing the hamper. "How has Dad's routine been? Is he eating well?" Sarah frowned. Her dad could barely recognize the silverware these days, let alone fold laundry. Before she could question her, she heard David's weak voice calling from the bedroom door. "Hi, Dad," she replied, hugging him gently. She could feel his ribs more prominently through the thin fabric of his shirt. I missed you." "Yes, Dad, that's Max," she confirmed softly, guiding him back to his room. "I'll help you lie down for a bit, okay? He sometimes loses his balance," Nancy justified, straightening the covers, "but I'm always around to prevent more serious falls." The next morning, Sarah decided to work from home. Her laptop was open on the kitchen table, but her eyes constantly strayed to observe the interaction between Nancy and her dad. The caregiver seemed different when she thought Sarah wasn't paying attention. Her movements were more abrupt, her voice more impatient. "David, you need to take this medicine now," Nancy insisted, her tone bordering on irritation as she held a glass of water and a pill. David, confused and agitated, shook his head negatively. Sarah was about to intervene when she noticed something even more disturbing. The pill that Nancy was holding was a different color than usual. She got up discreetly and went to the medicine cabinet, checking the prescription. Her heart raced as she confirmed that it wasn't the correct medicine for that time. The caregiver hesitated for a fraction of a second before handing over the pill. "Sure, it's the one prescribed for 10 a.m. The medicine incident was just the beginning. Throughout the day, Sarah noticed other troubling details. The water in Max's bowl was lukewarm and dirty, despite Nancy claiming she changed it several times a day. Her dad's lunch, which was supposed to be served at 12:30 p.m. sharp because of his medications, was only offered almost 2 hours later. In the middle of the afternoon, while David was dozing in his favorite armchair, Sarah found a notebook hidden between the cushions on the sofa. It was the diary she had suggested her dad keep on the days when his memory still allowed. The latest entries, although confused and with shaky handwriting, revealed disturbing fragments. "I'm hungry. She said I already ate, but I don't remember." "We need to give your dad a bath," Nancy announced, entering the room. Seeing Sarah with the diary in her hands, her face changed for an instant. "Oh, you found that old notebook. He keeps writing nonsense in there. You know how Alzheimer's is." In the bathroom, her suspicions were confirmed. Her dad's body was covered in small bruises in different stages of healing. His skin was dry, as if it wasn't being properly moisturized after the bath. There were signs of diaper rash due to the irregular changing of diapers. David looked at her with teary eyes, a momentary lucidity crossing his wrinkled face. Sometimes it hurts," he mumbled. "Max tries to help, but—" Max lightly scratched at the bathroom door, his snout appearing through the crack when Sarah opened it. The golden retriever entered, positioning himself protectively between David and the door, his ears alert to any approaching sound. Sarah spent the night awake, her laptop illuminating the room as she obsessively researched cases of elder abuse. The statistics were frightening. Thousands of cases reported annually, and experts estimated that many more remained hidden, protected by a veil of silence and fear. The soft light of dawn began to filter through the curtains when she heard Max's light footsteps in the hallway, followed by the familiar sound of her dad moving in the next room. She closed her laptop and walked to the window, observing the garden that now seemed a reflection of Nancy's neglect. Wilted flowers, overgrown grass, the rose bushes that her dad loved so much withering under the relentless sun. "Good morning, honey," David's voice sounded from the door, clearer than in recent days. Such were the moments of lucidity, unpredictable and precious as dewdrops under the morning sun. "That woman," he began, hesitant. "She's not your mom, is she?" "Sometimes," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "When that woman is here and you're not, it's like the words disappear, like that poem by Robert Frost about the road not taken." It was at that moment that Sarah made her decision. She picked up the phone and called Peter, her neighbor and childhood friend who lived 2 houses down. As a computer technician, he could help her with the most important part of her plan. 2 hours later, Peter was at her house, carrying a discreet case with surveillance equipment. While Nancy hadn't arrived yet, they walked through the house, identifying the best spots to install the tiny cameras. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of determination and apprehension. "And you can really monitor everything from your house?" That must be Nancy, Sarah said, checking the clock. Peter, thank you. You don't know how much this means to me. Nancy, I need to talk to you, Sarah said, leading the caregiver to the kitchen. Max followed them, maintaining his usual guard. A last-minute trip came up. I need to spend 3 days in Denver for an important presentation. Sarah watched Nancy's reaction carefully, noticing the slight tremor in her rehearsed smile. The camera hidden behind the spice rack captured every movement, every expression. You don't need to worry so much, Nancy interrupted, a touch of impatience escaping in her voice. I've taken care of your dad on other trips. I know the routine well. David raised his eyes from the newspaper, a shadow of fear crossing his face. You'll come back, won't you? Sarah noticed how her dad winced slightly at the sound of the caregiver's voice, a movement so subtle that it could go unnoticed by anyone who didn't know him so well. Max emitted a small whimper, pressing his body against David's legs. At night, after Nancy left, Sarah sat with Peter at his house, testing the cameras one last time. The images were clear, the audio crystal clear. Back home, Sarah found her dad in his room, already in his pajamas, with Max lying at the foot of the bed. The golden retriever raised his head when she entered, wagging his tail slightly. Sarah kissed his forehead and left the room silently. In the hallway, she checked her cell phone once more. The camera images were being transmitted perfectly. Tomorrow, when Nancy arrived, she would be at Peter's house watching everything. Good morning, David. The caregiver's voice sounded cheerful through the speakers. Sarah already left, so it's just you and me today. Well, 3, counting that stubborn dog. The first hour went by normally. Nancy helped David with breakfast, although Sarah noticed that she served smaller portions than recommended. The medication time, however, revealed the first serious irregularity. Sarah felt her blood boil. She's skipping medications! She exclaimed, gripping the arm of the chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The following hours were a succession of agonizing discoveries. After breakfast, Nancy simply sat on the couch to watch television, completely ignoring the physical therapy exercises that were supposed to be done with David. When he tried to get up on his own, disoriented, she just yelled from afar. Max barked in protest, running to help his owner. The golden retriever managed to guide David back to the armchair, earning an irritated look from Nancy. You've had enough, she said curtly when David asked for more. I'm not cleaning up your mess if you get sick. Stop being dramatic. I have 3 other old folks to take care of after this, you know? I don't have time for fussiness. The rest of the afternoon was equally disturbing. Nancy spent most of the time on the phone, ignoring David's confused calls. In a particularly painful moment, he began to cry softly, calling for Sarah. Max tried to comfort him, licking his hands and receiving a brusque shove from Nancy. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. The camera images kept running through her mind like a never-ending horror movie. Next door, at Peter's house, the recordings accumulated more and more evidence of Nancy's neglect. The second day of observation had been even worse than the first. Peter, who was dozing on the couch, woke up with the sudden movement. Sarah, wait, we need to think calmly. If we act impulsively... The last images captured by the cameras showed Nancy grabbing David's arm with excessive force when he, confused, tried to leave the house looking for Sarah. Max had barked desperately, trying to intervene, only to be locked in the laundry room. Sarah shook her head, determined. I can't wait until tomorrow. What if she hurts someone else tonight? What if... Through the cameras, they watched Nancy heading straight to Sarah's office. With furtive movements, she began to rummage through the drawers, clearly looking for something specific. Call the police, she instructed, already at the door. Send them there now. I need to stop her. Max was the first to notice her arrival. The golden retriever, who was scratching insistently at the laundry room door, began to whimper softly. Sarah quickly freed him, and he immediately ran towards David's room. Sarah's voice made the caregiver jump, knocking several papers to the floor. Her eyes, widened behind her glasses, quickly changed from shock to a calculating expression. Nancy's professional smile disappeared completely, giving way to a hard expression that Sarah had never seen before. The caregiver straightened her posture, still holding some documents. Look for his power of attorney, the bank statements. Sarah took a step forward, her eyes fixed on the papers in Nancy's hands. Or maybe the documents of the other elderly people you care for? You don't understand anything. Nancy finally spoke, her voice filled with contempt. Do you think it's easy to take care of old people? That what you pay me is enough? They don't even know who they are anymore. What difference does it make? A noise from the hallway caught their attention. David stood in the doorway of the office in his faded blue pajamas with Max by his side. His eyes wandered confusedly between his daughter and the caregiver. While you steal the food I leave prepared, Sarah interrupted. While you ignore his medications, while you leave him dirty and hungry. The ones that recorded everything for the past 2 days. Every act of neglect, every shout, every moment you hurt my dad or ignored his needs. The police are on their way, Sarah informed her. And it's not just the recordings from here. Peter has everything documented. The other families you scam, the diversion of medications, everything. Max reacted instantly, placing himself between them and barking threateningly. The sudden noise startled David, who cowered against the wall. 2 police officers entered the office, followed by Peter. The scene they found was tense. Sarah blocking the door, Nancy surrounded by scattered documents, David cowering in a corner with Max protecting him. The change in Nancy's behavior was instantaneous. Her shoulders slumped, and her face assumed an expression of studied innocence. There must be some mistake, she said, her voice trembling artificially. I'm just a dedicated caregiver. While one of the officers began to read Nancy her rights, the other approached David gently. Max, still in a protective stance, relaxed a little as he realized there was no longer a threat. He began, his voice weak but clear. She wouldn't let Max stay with me, said I didn't need a dog, that it was a waste of time. Peter approached with his laptop. I have all the recordings here, he informed the officers, and we found something else. Forged documents in the name of other elderly people. She was planning some kind of financial scam. The only ungrateful one here is you, Sarah replied, her voice firm despite the tears. These people trusted you. We trusted you. We'll need all the recordings, the social worker informed, and it would be good to do a complete medical exam on your dad to document any signs of neglect or mistreatment. The following hours passed like a blur for Sarah. The doctor had recommended taking David to the hospital for a complete evaluation, and now they were in a hospital room, waiting for the test results. Max, being a registered assistance dog, received special permission to stay with them. Sitting in the chair next to the bed, Sarah held her dad's hand. It was thinner than she remembered, with purple blotches that made her heart clench. We'll go home soon, Dad. The doctors just want to make sure you're okay. Your dad is dehydrated, the nurse explained gently, and we found some signs of mild malnutrition, but with proper care, he should recover well. Peter appeared later, bringing a change of clean clothes for David and coffee for Sarah. The police are reviewing all the recordings, he informed her in a low voice. They found 3 more families who were victims of her. It seems she's been doing this for years. Hey, Peter placed his hand on her shoulder. You did notice, and more importantly, you acted. Many families will be helped because of what you did. Sarah felt the tears welling up again. It was the first time in months that her dad had mentioned her mum so lucidly. Yes, Dad. When we get home, we'll take care of the garden together, like we used to. The attending physician entered the room at that moment, carrying a clipboard with the test results. His face was kind but serious as he explained the situation to Sarah. Look, Sarah, called Andrea, the new caregiver, from the back porch. Your dad is making incredible progress with physical therapy. The sun feels good today, commented David, stopping to observe his rose bushes. The plants, once neglected, were beginning to show signs of recovery after the daily care that Sarah had resumed. Is it time for my meds yet? David asked, turning to Andrea with an anxious expression. Sarah watched the interaction with a pang in her heart. The difference in treatment was stark. Andrea had infinite patience, always explaining each action, respecting David's time and limitations. Max, who had previously reacted with suspicion to any stranger, had quickly accepted the new caregiver. They found documents from at least 12 elderly people, the investigator informed. She had been systematically diverting money from their accounts, in addition to the neglect in care. The case goes to trial next month. David turned to her, his blue eyes momentarily free from the fog of Alzheimer's. Your mum always said that gardens are like people, he said, his voice laden with a rare clarity. They need constant care, love, and patience to bloom. The day of the trial arrived with a grey autumn morning. Sarah adjusted the bow tie she had placed on Max, a small formality that the judge had allowed, recognizing the crucial role of the golden retriever in the case. As an assistance dog, Max had authorization to accompany them in the courtroom. David was having one of his more lucid days, dressed in his best suit, the one he used to wear to teach at the university. Andrea had helped him get ready with special care, understanding the importance of that moment. When Nancy was brought into the room, Max emitted a low growl, soon silenced by a gentle caress from David. The ex-caregiver looked smaller in her prison uniform, her glasses replaced by a simpler model, her face stripped of the mask of professionalism she used to wear. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically, the video recordings, the fraudulent financial documents, the medical reports documenting the neglect. Each piece of evidence was a new stab in Sarah's heart, forcing her to relive those painful moments. When it was time for Sarah's testimony, she took a deep breath and walked to the stand. Max followed her, remaining faithfully by her side. Throughout her testimony, Sarah described in painful detail everything she had witnessed through the cameras. Other families in the audience wept silently, recognizing in her story the same pattern of abuse that their own loved ones had suffered. The defense attorney tried to argue that the recordings had been obtained illegally, that there was no concrete evidence of physical abuse, that it was all just a misunderstanding. But the evidence was irrefutable, especially when combined with the testimonies of the other families and the fraudulent financial records. All rise for the verdict, announced the bailiff. The entire courtroom stood up, the silence so dense that Sarah could hear her own breathing. A collective sigh swept through the room. Sarah felt her legs tremble and gripped the arm of the chair to stay standing. Beside her, Max remained in an attentive posture, as if understanding the solemnity of the moment. Nancy remained motionless in her chair, her face an unreadable mask. Sarah looked at her dad, who was observing everything with surprising clarity in his gaze. David smiled slightly and squeezed her hand. Peter, who had testified about the recordings, approached with a comforting smile. "It's over," he said simply. "Honey," called David, his voice firmer than normal, "can we stop by the botanical garden? Today I remembered that your mum loved taking you there when you were little." On the way to the botanical garden, Sarah received a message from a local journalist. The story had caught the attention of the media, and several organizations advocating for the rights of the elderly wanted her participation in awareness campaigns. Sarah had completely transformed her professional life. After much reflection, she accepted a proposal to work remotely, allowing her to be more present in her dad's life. Her former work trips were replaced by video conferences and online meetings. "Today's visiting day, isn't it?" asked David, his eyes shining with a momentary clarity. After Nancy's case, Sarah had transformed her experience into something positive. With the help of Peter and other affected families, she created a support group for people caring for relatives with Alzheimer's. The bi-weekly meetings took place in her garden, a space that had become a symbol of healing and renewal. Max, who now officially wore an assistant's dog vest, had become a kind of mascot for the group. His story inspired other families to pay more attention to the signals their pets gave. Soon the garden was filled with soft voices and subdued laughter. families sharing experiences, exchanging care tips, offering mutual support. David, in his moments of lucidity, liked to tell stories from his days as a professor, and even when he got confused, he was listened to with respect and affection. Sarah observed the scene before her. Her dad smiling as he petted Max, Andrea serving coffee to the visitors, the roses swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. In a corner of the garden, a discreet plaque announced, "Project Guardians of Affection, support group for families of people with Alzheimer's." Sarah sat down next to her dad, holding his wrinkled hand. Max rested his head on David's lap, his ears relaxed, eyes attentive as always. The golden retriever, who one day had been just a pet, had become a true guardian, a silent hero who had changed not only their lives, but those of so many other families. The afternoon sun painted the sky with golden hues, and the roses exhaled their sweet perfume. In the garden that had become a sanctuary of healing and hope, Sarah finally understood. Sometimes angels have 4 paws and a heart bigger than the world.